The hype going into the release of WWE 2K24 was massive to say the least. Showcase mode was built around celebrating 40 years of WrestleMania. We saw the return of three beloved match types, special guest referee, casket, and gauntlet matches, and even a debut of a brand new ambulance match, which hadn't been seen in a WWE game since the 2009 DS version of SmackDown vs. Raw 2010. On top of that, we got the Trading Blows minigame, super finishers, and persona cards, though those have been pretty divisive. Add in the returns of legends like Ricky Steamboat, Rick Rude, George the Animal Steel, Ken Shamrock, and the Three Faces of Foley, and you can see why the buzz was so strong. Now, was it as huge as 2K14's build-up? Not quite, but it still brought an energy to the franchise we hadn't felt in nearly 2 years. Fast forward to March 5th, for those who picked up the Deluxe or 40 Years of WrestleMania Edition, and WWE 2K24 finally dropped. And for the most part, it delivered. The gameplay was as fun as ever, the roster was surprisingly up to date at launch, and the showcase mode unlocked a ton of classic WrestleMania arenas. That said, while the game was fun, it wasn't exactly a masterpiece. Going back to showcase mode, it was just as disappointing as 2K23's, and this was really the point where a lot of fans gave up on it altogether. Universe mode barely changed outside of a few new cutscenes, persona cards were a grind to unlock, and then 2K went and dropped the DLC pack with football players that nobody asked for. So, was the game fun? Yes. Did it live up to 2K14's legacy? No. Now this video isn't a full retrospective, but rather a deep dive into a version of the game that almost no one talks about. You see, when you install WWE 2K24, whether it's disc or digital, the game automatically updates to the latest patch. But if you disconnect from the internet and install it offline, you'll get the vanilla 1.00 version of the game. Now you might be asking yourself, why focus on version 1.00? Isn't it basically the same as the latest patch? And that, my friend, is where things get pretty interesting. Because here's the key. Shortly after the game's announcement trailer dropped, a lawsuit was filed by former WWE employee Janelle Grant against Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis. I'm not going to go into the disturbing details of the allegations, but I'm sure most of you know what the case is about. So, what does the lawsuit have to do with WWE 2K24, and more specifically, version 1.00? Well, I'll have my friend Sash Shadow explain that later. In the meantime though, when you boot up the vanilla version, the menu feels mostly the same, but there are some notable differences. For example, several mode tiles feature different wrestlers compared to the updated patches. On version 1.00, Rhea Ripley represents the play tile, while Asuka is used for universe mode. These are just two examples, but there are a few changes like this across the menu. Moving into the arena selection screen, things start to look even stranger. A lot of the arenas, particularly the WrestleMania venues, appear unpolished with odd lighting issues that make them look like unfinished compared to the patched version. And then there's WrestleMania 38. Instead of updating the preview image for this game, they literally recycled the same arena image from 2K23, logo and all. Now I get it, they didn't really need to rebuild the entire arena since it was already in the previous game, but leaving the 2K23 logo on the thumbnail feels sloppy per se. Next up is the wrestler selection screen. Now while some renders match what you'll see in the latest patch, a surprising number of wrestlers either have placeholder renders, blank images, or just use their in-game models as portraits. Some clear examples include Roman Reigns, Sami Zayn, Rhea Ripley, Drew McIntyre, Kevin Owens, a few of John Cena's WrestleMania attires, Randy Savage, Undertaker 14, Trish Stratus, and Bray Wyatt's Saturday Night's Main Event model. And there are more, but you get the idea. The roster presentation looks half-finished compared to the patch version. Gameplay-wise, things feel about the same, but there are some glaring issues. Submissions, for example, are basically impossible to escape. Once you're locked in, it's game over.
Game over!
Intruder destroyed.
Blood effects also look bad, almost like ketchup stains instead of realistic cuts. Even the referee shirts look strangely off, like the textures weren't finalized or something. As for showcase mode, the match screen images are another giveaway that this is an unpolished build. They're often zoomed in too far and misaligned, which makes them look pretty amateurish compared to how they appear in the final patched version. Now when it comes to glitches, I didn't come across anything game-breaking, but there are some odd details worth pointing out. In the WrestleMania 36 arena, there's apparently an invisible crowd. You still hear full crowd noise during matches, even though WrestleMania 36 in real life took place with 0 fans in attendance. Going back to the topic of WrestleMania 36, in the latest patch of the game, after completing the Bray Wyatt vs. John Cena showcase match, you'll unlock a special variation of the WrestleMania 36 arena called WrestleMania 36 Firefly Funhouse. It's basically the same arena, just with no lighting. But in the vanilla 1.00 version, this variation is completely missing. Other quirks include Undertaker 14's entrance showing green screen effects for no reason, and Jimmy and Jey Uso's WrestleMania 39 attires not unlocking at all, even after completing the Roman Reigns vs. Cody Rhodes showcase match. One of the biggest difference you'll know in version 1.00 is the lack of commentary. Outside of the voice acting in My Rise and Corey Graves' narration in showcase mode, there's absolutely no commentary during matches. You won't hear Michael Cole, Corey Graves, or Byron Saxton in any capacity, even if your audio settings are untouched. It makes the gameplay feel strangely empty. Now, the biggest reason I decided to investigate this version of the game is because it actually has 2 wrestlers who ended up being completely unplayable by release: Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon. I got my friend Shadow to talk about this, so I'm gonna leave it to him.
Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon in WWE 2K24 is one of the biggest controversies of all time when it comes to the world of WWE video games. And what's the controversy, you might ask? Well, it's the fact that they just straight up weren't playable in the game at all. Yeah, 2K24 was the first game in forever to not feature Mr. McMahon and Brock Lesnar as playable characters, which sure, while the roster in the final game more than made up for their removal, it still sucks that they just weren't included. Well, that's until you realize why they were removed in the first place. During 2K24's build up to release, a lot of pretty serious stuff came out about Mr. McMahon, and yeah, let's just say he's not somebody you'd really want to be around ever. Because all of these allegations against Vince were so serious, it basically forced him to step down from the company, and all of this really shook things up for 2K24's development. With how serious this whole situation was, it really begged the question as to whether Vince would even remain playable or be featured in the game. I mean, in the best case scenario, Vince is removed, we'd still have Brock Lesnar in the game at least. Son of a bitch. Yeah, Brock ended up being name dropped in the allegations against Vince, but in his case, it wasn't exactly clear whether he was legitimately guilty or not. Brock could have been innocent, but to 2K, none of that mattered. Now, not long before any of these allegations had even come out, Brock was featured on the 40 Years of WrestleMania cover, making it pretty clear that he would be playable in the game. But once all the allegations came up, Brock was just straight up removed from the cover entirely and replaced with Cena. Fast forward to the game's release, and yeah, both Brock and Vince were cut entirely from the playable roster, but funny enough, they were still present in the rest of the game, to an extent anyways. Brock was still featured in Showcase, as well as Vince, they just weren't featured as playable characters. Look, I understand why they did this, but the thing is, in the initial 1.0 version of 2K24, they were very much still playable and accessible through regular means. Them being removed from the playable roster wasn't enough though, as they were still very much featured in the actual real-life footage that was used in the showcase. Now, in the post-Day 1 patch version of the game, all the footage that featured Brock and Vince just showed both of them with blurs over their face, which, when you think about it, is kinda crazy. Never in my life did I think I'd ever see Vince McMahon or Brock Lesnar censored in a WWE video game, but lo and behold, that's exactly what happened in 2K24. Interestingly though, in the 1.0 version of the game, both of them were completely uncensored in Showcase, meaning that much like their removal from the roster, all of these changes were made incredibly late into the game's development. Now, with all that being said, while these changes were a pretty big hit to 2K24 as a whole, modders did find a way around them, as Brock and Mr. McMahon were added back to the roster via community creations due to their models and renders still being in the files. And speaking of renders, my good friend Wrestling IG wanted me to take a look at some of the renders from the 1.0 version of the game, and what the fuck?
Overall, it was pretty interesting to take a look into a version of WWE 2K24 that's rarely talked about in the wrestling game community. The fact there were 2 wrestlers here who were removed before release, the placeholder renders, and the noticeable gameplay differences all make this version feel less like a finished product and more like a time capsule. A glimpse at what 2K24 looked like before all the final edits and patches were made. Anyway, that's it for this video. I want to give a big thank you to Sash Shadow for taking the time to appear and break things down. Make sure to go subscribe to his channel. Let me know in the comments what other vanilla versions of WWE 2K games you'd like me to dive into next. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.